rush swiftly into a blazing fire to perish there, so do these men rush into your mouths with great speed to their own destruction. Just like moths rush with great amount of speed to jump into any type of blazing fire for the purpose of perishing there, in the same way saw these people rushing into the mouths of the Supreme Soul with such a great amount of speed, also for the purpose of their own destruction. Arjuna said one thing that has given two examples in the last verse and in this verse. The first example was of rivers meeting the ocean, and the second example is of moths rushing into a blazing fire. Both these examples explain the same thing, but they have a metaphysical difference between them. In the 28th verse, when Arjuna described what he saw as similar to rivers rushing to meet the ocean, then Arjuna is explaining the spiritual fact that those things that descend from the Supreme Soul also enter into the Supreme Soul for the destruction. That is what Arjuna explained. The example of the moth is slightly different. This is because the moth does not descend from the fire. The moth does not descend from the fire in the same way that the water of rivers descends from the ocean. Nevertheless, the moth still sees the flame and jumps in it to perish there. Therefore, what Arjuna has described in this verse is a description of what happens in the samsara, the material world. What Arjuna said in the last verse was a spiritual reality, and the example that Arjuna gives in this verse is a description of what we see in our day-to-day lives. And the individual has to pay the consequences of his own karmas. Because of ignorance in the form of darkness, whatever karmas human beings do create the destruction of the human being himself. The moth becomes completely deluded by ignorance. There is a following verse in the Garuda Purana. Uranga matanga tatanga dungam nina hata panchira pancha ekatta pramadi sakantana hante yaseva taptena vidyava pancha. Like a deer that gets pulled by sweet music, like an elephant that gets pulled by a she-elephant, like a moth gets pulled by the color of a flame, like a honeybee gets pulled by the fragrance of a lotus, and like a fish that nibbles at a bait and gets caught. A person who is running extremely after sensual happiness forgets what is good for them. For the 5 sense organs, 5 examples of animals are given. These 5 are animals who do not have any control over one of the sense organs. In order to catch deers, a hunter makes sweet music using instruments. Deers like listening to music very much. Hearing the music, the deer becomes attracted and becomes pulled towards it. Another 15 or 20 hunters are waiting, having created a big net. They trap the deer and then and kill it. Because the deer does not have control over its hearing senses, it gets caught and killed. It has so much attraction to music. In order to catch elephants, hunters make a model of a she-elephant and dig a pit underneath. They put leaves and grass on top of the pit so that it looks like the ground. An elephant comes from far away and sees the model she-elephant. It becomes attracted to her and runs towards the she-elephant. It cannot reach her in the end because it falls into a ditch first. The hunters do not get anything to eat or drink for 15-20 days. A living elephant is worth 100,000 rupees and a dead elephant is worth 25,000 rupees. He does not have control over his touch senses and therefore he gets pulled. That is why the elephant meets his death. A moth sees the color of the flame and likes the color so much that it goes towards the flame. He gets caught in the flame and dies. This is the attraction of the sight. Urdu poets write a lot of poems about this. Shama ko dekhkar parwana unki qurbani deta hai, meaning on seeing a flame, a moth sacrifices himself. Sanskrit poets say that this is not sacrifice but stupidity. So many moths have died by going to flame for 1,000 years, and yet not a single moth realizes that they should not go into flame and that it will finish them. There should be a little evolution somewhere. But this does not happen with moths. This is because they are attracted to sight and therefore they jump into the flame. We saw earlier in this chapter that a honeybee gets attracted to the smell of a lotus and goes inside the lotus to suck its juice. When the sun rises and the lotus closes and the honeybee gets trapped inside the lotus, a honeybee eats wool made out of clay. When a person makes a house and they make a wall out of clay, the honeybee eats the wall of the house. Such a honeybee does not come out of eating the lotus petals because it sits inside and thinks, Ratre Gamashakti Ravishanti Suprapratam Pavashvanu Deshyati Hashyati Pankajasvi Iddam Vishanti Koshagete Vitete Ahanda Handa Nalum Gacha Uchahara. It is night now and night will go. Morning will come and the sun will rise. The flowers in the garden nearby will bloom, and when my flower blooms, then I will go. The bee thinks this, but then a herd of elephants come and stamp on the flower. It thinks that life is so simple. Life is not so simple. A herd of elephants come in the morning and tear apart the flowers. At the time when the foot of the elephant steps on the flowers, this attraction to smell and other attractions are procrastinations that postpone good things that we were meant to do. The bee had a strength, but it did not come out. If it did not have the strength, then we would have felt sorry for it and said that the poor thing got stuck, yet it had the strength and did not use it. Then we have the fish. The fisherman puts flour on top of a hook so that it acts as bait. The fish sees the flour, comes to eat it and gets stuck in the hook. Whenever somebody becomes greedy for happiness, then they just run after it and it gets stuck on the hook just like the fish. Whenever somebody becomes greedy for happiness, then they get stuck into this hook in the form of sadness. Whenever you get sorrows in life, then just see, you first expected happiness and sadness came out of it. Sadness does not come out of its own separate existence. But the person expected happiness and it did not happen, that is why sadness came. The fish does not stop from going towards the hook because it is attracted to the sense objects of taste. The fish thinks that it will get to the flower and eat. It gets stuck and it gets killed. The poets say that each of these small animals do not have control over one of their senses and run after each of these things, and therefore they eventually come to the deaths. But humans have all five senses, therefore what's going to happen to them? This is because they do not have control over all five of the sense organs. They have no control over the nose, the ears, the tongue, the skin and the eyes. They have no type of control whatsoever. What will happen to them? All the sorrows that come in life are because of running after things. The moth itself runs after something that will lead to its death. The flame does not call the moth there. The moth has not descended from the flame. Not only that, but the flame does not call it there. The flame does not say, come to me, yet the moth still goes there. In this is the moth's sole discretion. When human beings themselves do wrong deeds, and they have to suffer the consequences of those deeds, and then at that time the Supreme Soul is in the field of a divine controller, the Supreme Soul looks at this steadily. If we look at this first, then we get the answers to so many questions from it. When a big tragic event happens, for example, a person is looking to the good to the whole world has sorrows, and there is no doubt that this person has done good deeds in his life, then we have the question that how can such a good person have sorrows? In the place of the moth in the flame, there is an airplane crash and so many people died at the same time. We think that such a bad thing has happened. We feel like this and we do not understand why this is happening. We consider whether God cannot see this happening and whether God does not feel anything inside him about this. No, it does not happen. God is sitting there as a divine controller. The reason for this is that our perspective is very limited. We only look at the last 5 to 10 years, 25 years or 50 years, whereas the Supreme Soul is looking at all the person's births. We think about what numbers of which birth the person is paying consequences of. We do not know, and therefore many times we have doubts towards God. But the Supreme Soul is a divine controller and controls everything. Everything that is happening properly. The moth itself goes inside the flame. Just like the flame does not go and calls the moth towards it, and the moth goes itself on its own decision to the flame, in the same way this kind of bad deeds do not call themselves call us. The individual himself goes based on his own decision towards dushkarma, bad deeds, and becomes sad as a consequence. It is the individual's own nature that makes the individual do this. Many people have a tendency that whenever they get sorrows in life, then they blame it on others. They say that the other person has done this, and that they are doing it because the other person is doing this. But in reality, it is the person himself that has made the decision to perform the action, and the person himself is suffering the consequences of his karmas. Nobody else can inspire us to perform dushkarma, bad deeds. Others can inspire us to perform satkarma, divine acts, but who can inspire us to perform dushkarma, bad deeds? Here's where the thinking has become twisted. Do we not know? It is always our decision to perform wrong deeds, and we have to suffer the consequences of them. Think about it quietly, that on the one hand, there is the example of the rivers and ocean, and on the other hand, there is the example of the moth going to the flame and jumping into it. One is a spiritual truth, and the other is the truth of happenings in the mature world. Okay, next verse.